the one with the blue, white, blue on the rudder. It hardly sounds as if it's doing any work at all.
Yeah, just cruising its way into the air. Whereas the Avenger, big one with the yellow nose, he's rolling right now from the right.
Again, that's flown by Tim Dugan. Ben Lappin flying the Corsair. Graham Hoskins, I was speaking with him this morning. He owns this beautiful Corsair. Very, very lucky man.
Oh yeah.
Avenger, part of the Paul Bennett stable.
BEA, beautiful.
Absolutely incredible. That Corsair, the gull wing, known as the bent wing bird. First US Navy aircraft to reach 400 miles an hour.
Yeah, it was a grunty bird, and used to dip a wing if you were going slow and then applied power, or if you're going too slow and stalled, and at one point was known as the Ensign Eliminator.
This is our Pacific Theatre display for this afternoon. So we'll have a few individual flypasts and then the solos, so we can get to describe the manufacture and the history of the aircraft, what they were used for.
Lovely.
If you have a chance to look at that Corsair close up, that is a huge aeroplane.
Yep, they're both pretty large, and what's amazing is the guys who are flying them are not much older than the kids who were flying them in World War II, from my perspective as an old fart. My father made that. We were at an air show in New Zealand one time, and he said, "Look at those little punks with my aircraft. Look, they're so..." And then he suddenly realised they were about the same age he was when he went over to pick the aircraft up from the US. I've just been given some news about Benny that makes me want to go and have words with him again. He's part of a 100 squadron and was just trained to fly the Spitfire, so that makes him the first RAF person trained to fly a Spitfire since World War II. He's done it again. Another person from a flying family. Here we go.
You can just hear that big Pratt & Whitney 2800 in the Corsair. It's just loping along.
It was the first aircraft designed specifically around that engine, wasn't it?
2800 fitted so many machines.
Well, folks, we've got another lost child this time. We've actually found a child, so that means there's probably a lost parent out there. The child's name is Riley, and the mother's name is Rachel. So a child has been found and taken to the information centre. So Rachel, Riley is waiting for you at the information centre. Once again, it's the smaller tent with the Wings Over Illawarra markings that's not too far from us here on the tower, next to the tent with the orange and white windsock hanging off a pole.
They're coming in again, ladies and gentlemen. This is probably the last view that a Japanese fighter pilot or a destroyer captain saw.
Yeah.
the sound of round.
And such large aircraft to operate off aircraft carriers that were straight deck, no angled decks back in World War II. Huge. And you're heaving deck and you're landing on them, taking off from special breed, right?
Absolutely. And I think maybe one more pass before they break off into their solo displays.
As you said, Ando, possibly the last thing they saw before the torpedo from the TBM or the guns from the F4. Just imagining squadrons of these aircraft.
This was the advantage that the Americans certainly had over the Japanese at the end of the war. The mass production, there was just overwhelming production of ships, aircraft, anything. Whereas the Japanese fought valiantly, they could not fight against mass production.
Which does somewhat make it more ironic about the 60s with the Japanese vehicles taking over from the US market through mass production.
That old ad, when you're on a good thing, stick to it.
That's it.
Tim bringing the Avenger in now. Flight first flew in August 1941 and was actually displayed to the public on the east coast of the United States for the first time on the 7th of December 1941.
Sounds like a very special date, that one.
Not knowing that only a few hours later the Japanese would attack the American Pacific Fleet in Pearl Harbor. The aircraft was given the name Avenger specifically for that purpose. It's a 3-seat torpedo bomber and dive bomber powered by a 1900 horsepower Wright engine, an R2600, same engine that was fitted in the B-25 bomber. Its first action was at the Battle of Midway between the 4th and 7th of June 1942.
And that was the first battle in the World War II, and in fact the world, where both sides never saw each other, the ships, because it was all carrier aircraft versus carrier aircraft.
There were only 6 of these machines there at Midway, but they were credited with drawing off the Japanese combat air patrols over their carriers, which then allowed the dive bombers in to sink them. That was probably, you could say, the turning point of World War II, not very long after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Even though the war dragged out for so long, they lost so many of their carriers in that action. They also, very soon after that, in the Battle of the East Solomons, the TBMs from the Saratoga and the Enterprise sank the Japanese carrier Ryujo, and shortly after that they sank the battleship Hiei.
Now, some interesting people have flown these aircraft. Paul Newman was a gunner on board one of these aircraft. He wanted to fly, but he didn't have the eyesight for it. And George Bush Sr. was flying one of these when he got shot down at Chichijima.
He was the youngest US naval aviator in World War II. His crew unfortunately perished, but he was picked up. Chichijima was like a horseshoe-shaped island, and very, very high cliffs, like escarpments almost like this, and they had to hit the target, fly down through the mouth of the horseshoe, bomb, and then climb up, and with all of the anti-aircraft guns both in the harbour and on the top. And it was an incredible place to try and attack. But it was a radio station there, and they had to. The Japanese currently use it for flying boat operations.
Oh, okay. It sounds like a bit of a turkey shoot for the poor Yanks.
Now, this aircraft is painted up in the markings of the USS Bunker Hill. You can see the torpedo bay doors open there. 2 forward-firing 50 caliber machine guns, and a Corsair coming in from the opposite direction.
That was an interesting pass. Now the thing about the Bunker Hill markings, that explains the arrow upwards and the arrow forwards. That's how the Bunker Hill had a big arrow on its deck, so you knew which aircraft carrier to land on.
And all of the carrier air groups all had their various things, the Enterprise, the Ticonderoga, the Bonhomme Richard, all of the major carriers or the Essex class carriers, and then all of what they call the Jeep carriers. They all had the same marking. It was not just the Avengers, it was also the Hellcats and the Corsairs that were operating there.
Yeah, because if you landed on the wrong carrier, you generally got your aircraft tagged, you got hassled. In fact, it still actually happened even in the Middle East, where they had a couple of carrier groups were operating. And even to this day, there were a couple of aircraft that accidentally landed on the wrong carrier. And when they returned to their own carrier, they had to clean off a lot of marks.
Oh, the same thing happened in Korea where they were all graffitied.
Yeah.
Corsair goes back to 1940 and they produced just under 12,500 of these in 7 different models and marks. They're produced by Vought, Goodyear, and Brewster actually produced a few too. Not very many. One of the problems with the aircraft was the incredibly long nose, the position of the pilot, and trying to set themselves up to land. And in the early parts, even though they had landed on the carrier, they decided not to do that. They were operating Corsairs from air bases, and they were Marine Corps guys that were operating out of Guadalcanal, like under the command of Pappy Boyington.
Bar Black Sheep.
Look at that beautiful oval and roll there.
Yeah. Now they actually called this aircraft from those combats operating off the land instead of a carrier the Sweetheart of the Marianas and the Angel of Okinawa, because of how well they were used to protect the people on the ground.
The aircraft had 650 caliber machine guns. It could carry 2,000 pounds of bombs, or up to 8 of these 5-inch high velocity aircraft rockets. Now this particular machine is one of the later models. This is an F4U5N. Now the aircraft was built as a night fighter. They had a radar pod out on the wings. But this particular machine has combat history, not in World War II, but as part of the what's known as the Soccer War.
Yeah, now, the war that wasn't really over a game of soccer, but that was what was the last flashpoint that tipped everyone over the edge.
Yep, the Salvadorians and the Hondurans, also known as the 100-hour war. The Hondurans, they had an ace pilot there, Major Soto. He shot down not only Corsairs but also Mustangs.
Well, it was the last battle where both sides were operating piston engine fighters, and in fact most of the aircraft involved were all US. There was Mustangs, Corsairs, T-28s, the Harvards, and also C-47s on both sides.
Some of those Mustangs came down from America. Picked up, they were civilian aircraft, and taken to Texas, quite a few of them, armed, and then flown down through Mexico. And I know when the first ones landed there, they had 2 Honduran pilots, 2 Salvadorian pilots that landed from opposite ends of the runway and collided in the middle.
That's embarrassing.
But this aircraft is a combat veteran from that operation.
You know, that war may have been the 100-hour war, but it took 10 years before they finally got peace sorted out.
Soto's victories, he had 3 victories. They were the only aerial combat victories that were scored during that campaign.
Didn't he get 3 in one day? first mission got one, then he got another, and it just happened to line up on the. And the second mission got two.
That aircraft still exists, pulling those beautiful streamers off the wingtips there.
Absolutely beautiful.
And if you like what you see here today, go and have a talk to Graham Hosking, because he'd sell the aircraft to you for the right price.
Yeah, somehow I think I need to get 2 lotto wins for this one.
Beautifully displayed there by Ben Lappin. It actually was the Royal Air Force, the Royal Navy Fleet Air Arm who taught the Americans the landing technique,
The continuous curving approach.
The British carriers were a lot smaller than the American ones, but they were still the ones to teach them how to fly it properly.
Yep. Wouldn't have been Winkle Brown who was involved in that, would it?
He was certainly, I don't know how many hundred aeroplanes he flew.
Almost anything from the era he flew.
Oh, everything, all of the Allied fighters, all of the German fighters. I think he flew a lot of the Japanese ones as well.
Yep.
Look at this aircraft. Wonderful. Just poetry in motion there.
And that was his last pass. Now, Ando, there was the story that the Japanese referred to the Corsair as the Whispering Death or the Whistling Death, but there's no evidence of that, is there?
I think that's something that was made up in the minds of the journalists at the time.
Yeah, because no one's found any evidence that it was called the Whistling Death, but wasn't the Beaufighter the Whispering Death?
The Beaufighter is known as Whispering Death.
There you go.
Look at that.
Gear down.
Huge gear. When the aircraft actually touches down and is running along, have a look at where the pilot's eye line is, and have a look how high up in the air the nose of the aircraft is.
Yeah.
It is so much higher, and this is why these aircraft coming into land either here or anywhere else on a carrier put in a big curved approach so that you can see the runway all the time. Next display has just taken off, flown by Phil Frawley, often called Australia's oldest fighter pilot.
Well,
And he has the distinction of flying a MiG-21.
Wasn't he also the gentleman who picked up, it was actually a record for the length of time he'd been training and the number of pilots and his age as an instructor on the Hawk?
I'm not going to answer that on the grounds that it might incriminate me.
Oh, he's got friends listening. Dang, I thought he wouldn't be listening while he was up there. Well, so much for that theory.
Frawls has been around for a long time. He was involved in the flying the first and second flights of the Sabre, which is also part of 100 Squadron. He was down there for the first flight. But Frawls has definitely flown MiG-21.
Mirage, Hornet, C-130. I've got a list here if you want. It's pretty long. This is an amazing list. I'm just looking at a note here that shows everything he's flown, and this is not everything. This is just the ones he was willing to admit to. But everything from like a Tiger Moth and a Chipmunk, CT-4, Trojan, Mirage, as I said before, and as you said, the MiG-21. Just amazing.
Now, the aircraft that he's flying today is the Aero L39 Albatross. Going back to the Corsair, just have a look at where Ben's eye line is compared to the height